What do you think?
I think we're dead meat. Real dead meat.
You're dead meat!
Go ahead and laugh, you guys. If I ever find a little bastards that did this, they're dead meat.
Hey, welcome to the Dead Meat Podcast, an extension of the YouTube channel Dead Meat. I'm James.
I'm Chelsea, and we're engaged, and we like to get scared together. Hey, our setup this week is different.
Yeah.
If you haven't noticed, if you're watching this and not just listening, because we have a guest on who is not where we are, because it's quarantine.
Yeah.
We have Mike Dougherty, a friend of ours, horror director, Trick or Treat, Krampus. He's Sam's dad. I think of him. Hi, Mike.
Howdy, how are you?
We're good. How's quarantine treating you?
I mean, could be worse.
Yeah.
Could be worse, but I'm doing okay.
Good.
Doing okay.
Good. Yeah, so we wanted to do an episode, I think inspired by this video that you and our friend Evan Gorski made. Small world that we also know, Evan.
Yeah.
You made this amazing montage of horror movies where it is incredible how the beats of these movies mirror what is going on right now. Do you want to kind of explain what this video is? And we'll put links to it and everything in the description.
Yeah. I mean, I found myself revisiting a lot of my favorite movies when the pandemic hit. And they're all movies that everybody knows and loves. You know, all the classics. The Thing, Alien, The Shining, The Mist. One of my favorites, underdog there. But I found that these were movies, I mean, they're always favorites. I'll usually watch them once or twice a year, just sort of put them on in the background. But what I noticed was when the pandemic hit, I was marathoning them, consciously or subconsciously. I think I was looking for survival tips, and I just found these little moments where a character would just utter a line that really hit home. A good example is Ripley in the original Alien, when she's trying to convince the other crew members not to come back on the ship because they'll break quarantine.
You could die in 24 hours. Open the hatch.
Listen to me. If we break quarantine, we could all die.
I just found these moments. I also noticed other people on social media doing the same thing. Like a lot of people were sort of revisiting horror movies that touched on themes about isolation, with The Shining, paranoia, zombie movies, obviously. And so I realized there was just sort of this through line, this theme that ran through all these different titles about survival and how they had like legitimate survival tips, that they've all sort of been like, again, it's almost subconsciously preparing us for this mass horror. And so I started talking to our mutual friend, Evan, and I said, it'd be funny if we just did a mashup that would be sort of a cathartic video that we could sort of share with friends and just throw it online and see what happens. And within a week, we were just up and running, and it just became this little passion project I was doing off to the side. And it just sort of snowballed from there.
It's so good. How long did it take to kind of go through and look for specific lines, or are these movies that you just know so well that it wasn't even that hard?
Yeah, that's what I want to know. Were you writing down lines? Was there a script of any sorts, or was it all kind of memory?
A lot of it was memory, to
be
honest.
Wow.
I mean, again, these are all movies that are easily in my top 10. And it was also just a good excuse to go back and rewatch them. One of my favorite habits is, I'll revisit a movie the same way a lot of people will listen to their favorite album. Like, I don't need to be sitting in front of the TV watching it. Mm-hmm. I just like hearing The Shining in the background. Or I just like hearing Alien, and just the lines, the sound design, just the atmosphere of it, I find very comfortable and reassuring. And so, I would be working or doing emails or dishes or whatever, and just have Alien in the background and just listen for key moments or lines that would hit home for the video. And then I would just shoot the clip off the TV and text it to Evan. And, his library is pretty vast anyway, so he's already got a lot of these movies too. And he would just find the right clip and throw it in. He would, he did the same thing on his end. I think he really sat down and rewatched Night of the Living Dead, for example. And then it just became a really fun collaboration where he sort of did a first pass at it, and then we started to sort of sculpt what the actual story of it was, like trying to make sure that the story of the video matched the events that we're all dealing with. starting with, okay, there is a pandemic, there's something out there, there's a virus, how vicious it is, quarantine, wearing masks, potential cures, what have you. And also sort of like the mass hysteria, people hoarding supplies, the debate in the media about, is there really something out there or not, and how we're all sort of turning on each other. It kind of just started to write itself. Like we were actually, in the middle of it is when there was that brief bit of wonderful advice to inject yourself with disinfectant. And that was a very, very late addition to the mashup. But thankfully, we both knew exactly what clips we wanted to use for that.
Yeah, I love that when you first put it on, it's like, oh, this is funny and kind of cool. And then as you're watching, it's like, oh, there's a narrative here. That's great.
Yeah, I kind of want to go.
Except you're living it.
Yeah, so not that
I almost
great,
want to
but-
go through like kind of the broad like beats of it, and then maybe take like a few minutes on each beat of the structure of it, and we could just talk about the movies in there. And
also, before we do that, as an editor, you recording a clip off your TV and sending it to your editor is the most producer thing I can imagine. I can just picture Evan getting this and being like, nah, I guess I'll go look up the clip myself in my footage.
I mean, I think he had fun, but I even turned on the subtitles.
Yeah,
just to make sure, like that the intent of each clip was clear.
Mm-hmm.
But it was fun.
Yeah, it sounds like. I mean, obviously, it worked out well.
There's really something to the idea of like using horror as a kind of comfort blanket, even though it seems like it's counterintuitive, right? Like everything going on is so scary and uncertain, and it's like, well, why would I want to further immerse myself in that? But I feel like
Contagion blew
I was about
up
to say, I literally was about to say
quarantine
Contagion was on, what was it? Like rentals for that movie skyrocketed.
Yeah.
That's such a random movie too.
Yeah, I mean, I watched Contagion twice. I'm not gonna lie. And I found it oddly comforting.
Yeah.
I think because it took on sort of a mythic status where it was obviously it's fiction. But at least it shows us prevailing in the end. So in a weird way, as much as it's terrifying, it sort of instills the hope of, okay, maybe there are still some intelligent people who work for the government.
Yeah.
Who are going to see us through this. I the same thing with all the other movies, watching The Thing and Alien and The Mist, Jaws, I watched twice, I think, which really mirrors our situation. They were just sort of oddly comforting, which is what stories are really ultimately supposed to do. As much as they terrify you along the way, ideally there's some satisfaction. There's something about the ending that hopefully inspires you to sort of move in that direction.
Unless you're watching The Mist.
Oh man, yeah. Let's hope we're not in The Mist.
Yeah.
I totally understand the idea of craving the 3-act structure right now, because right now we have no idea when we're gonna get back to normal.
Yeah.
Like we're still like, are we rescheduling our wedding?
Yeah.
We probably are. FYI. But
you could do a Zoom wedding. It'd be amazing.
oh, fun.
Oh yeah, my mom brought that up and was like, "Please don't do that." And I was like, "No,
Oh no, but I
won't,
just
Mom."
got the Snapchat filters for Zoom. That
You
could be a
did,
lot of
yeah.
fun. But yeah, it's so I think for sure that makes complete sense. Wanting, like escaping to a world where everything in this world sucks, but at least it ends at a certain point, and there's some kind of resolution, whether or not it's bad or not. Yeah, that's so bleak, but it makes complete sense.
We're in like an endless second act.
Yes,
Yeah, it's so weird.
We're really it's spinning our wheels. It's for sure.
I mean, I think it's fun that we're actually recording this on the anniversary of The Shining.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, this is.
Is it at 40 today?
It's the 40th anniversary of The Shining.
Oh yeah.
And I was just saying to a friend the other day, it feels like our current timeline feels like the Wednesday card, in the movie, where it's just Wednesday.
Yeah.
Every day is just Wednesday.
It's like you don't know what month, you don't know like at what
Wednesday.
point in the state. It's Wednesday, man.
It is Wednesday, my dude. That's my Jack Torrance doing fine. Never mind. Yeah, okay, so let's kind of go through just kind of the broad beats of like what makes up a survival horror. Like what are the phases? We'll go through kind of the 3 acts of it, and because it is amazing for how different all these movies are. There is something really human about like human nature kind of goes one way, you know, like there are consistencies throughout all these different movies where humans are, as like a mass hive mind, we all kind of act in a predictable way. So like the beginning is like, okay, there's something
threat
out there. Yeah.
There's the other, you know, whether it's the xenomorph, whether it's the shape-shifting creature from The Thing, a shark, zombie virus, what have you. It's like there's the threat to your human protagonists.
Yeah.
You know, which is why we also threw in the clip from the Terminator, you know, because like Reese's exposition about what the Terminator's motivation is, you know, it doesn't feel pity, it doesn't feel remorse, and it will not stop until you are dead. Like that's just the perfect, you know, again, like that movie is completely about obviously killer cyborgs from the future, but it still applies, you know, its motivations match those of a virus.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite kind of intro scenes in a movie like this, even though it's not technically the beginning of any kind of outbreak because it's the second in a series, but Dawn of the Dead in the TV station is one of my favorite sequences ever because it's so fucking scary.
Every dead body that is not exterminated becomes one of them. It gets up and kills. The people it kills get up and kill.
In between that and the apartment raid, it just really shows quickly how much this virus has affected, just completely broken down society.
Yeah, and you know, on top of that, it's often the first people affected and the people most affected. I'm thinking of Dawn of the Dead is because the apartment raid is like a low income.
Yeah,
I think. I'm trying to. It's been a while since I've seen it, but it's like the people who would be most vulnerable in real life to stuff like this. We see in Dawn of the Dead are the first people affected by it.
How the hell come we stick these low-life bastards in these big-ass fancy hotels anyway? Shit, man, this is better than I got.
He was so ahead of his time.
Yes.
Honestly, you know, like one of my favorite things is to go back and look at Night of the Living Dead, and you realize how prophetic it was, and when you look at Night of the Living Dead and you realize this was made right in the middle of the civil rights era, you know, and again, how ahead of its time it was to have an African-American man as your hero of a horror movie. But also just, you know, themes of paranoia and turning on each other and just the world going to hell.
Yeah.
And how we handle it.
Yeah, and even I love how like the role wasn't written for a black man, but they cast him just because he had the best audition. But with that casting, the lines between him and the
Barbara?
older, like the bald guy.
Oh, shit, I forget his name.
Yeah, but like they take on such a new meaning when that distrust is there.
Man, you're really crazy, you know that? You got 1 million windows up here. All these windows, you're gonna make them strong enough to keep these things out, huh?
I told you those things don't have any strength. I smashed 3 of them and pushed another one out the door.
Did you hear me when I told you they turned over our car?
Because that distrust happens regardless of race in these movies. Like in The Mist, it's not racially based. It's more like religion and
it's class.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, having that aspect in a movie that came out in 1968, it's wild.
Stepping back and looking at all these horror movies, that's what I find so amazing about them. That's what I love about the genre, is that of course it's entertaining. We love it for that. We love it for the gore and the monsters and all the horror icons it gave us, just the pure popcorn value. But to think that horror, which is a genre that a lot of people look down on, especially in the industry, even though it tends to build and keep studios alive, a lot of people in town just sort of scoff at it and just view it as a way to make a quick buck. It's so deceptively complex and complicated and educational, because it is able to dissect some pretty heavy themes about human nature and society and disguise it as popcorn entertainment, which is really the best way to convey a message, is to sort of Trojan horse it into people's minds, into their subconscious. And so to think that it's this particular genre, horror and sci-fi horror, which could honestly create a survival guide. No one's going to watch romantic comedies and figure out how to survive COVID-19, but you can watch enough of these movies together and actually pick up some pretty decent survival tips.
Yeah, especially thinking, as long as we're kind of, looking at the beginning of these movies, going back to Night of the Living Dead, in the very beginning of that, it's almost a joke, the fact that, oh, there's a zombie shambling across this graveyard. They just think it's a weird guy. Oh, they're coming to get you, Barbara. And that's when COVID was starting. I remember it seeming like just kind of a, hey, is that like a thing we should be worried about? And it just was like a weird thing that.
I mean, think about it. It was like, oh, well, there's only a few cases. It's fine. There's only a few zombies out there, you know? And then all of a sudden, we're locking ourselves in our houses and raiding store shelves. And I mean, that's what I think a lot of people. I don't know. I mean, I think horror fans probably get it more than most, or I'd like to think that they do. That all of these monsters, all these aliens and zombie viruses and everything else are just metaphors for potentially real world situations.
Yeah. So after this kind of, we introduce our stand-in for pandemic in this case, but our zombies, our disease, our shark. What's kind of after that? Like what stage are our characters in after the initial introduction of the bat
panic
thing? Just mass panic.
It's panic and finding shelter. It's just the preparation. It is the hoarding, the panic buying, the boarding up of the windows.
Yeah, I guess reverting to just the most basic survival instincts of finding safety and
when you mentioned kind of looking for shelter and finding like holing up in a location, I'm realizing that in all these movies we're kind of talking about, the locations are so distinct, like they are so crucial. Like you think of the grocery store in The Mist, the house in Night of the Living Dead, the mall in Dawn of the Dead.
They become characters. The Nostromo, Outpost 31. Like these are all things that have become so legendary that we wear T-shirts with their logos on them.
Hey, normally this would be an ad break, but it's not an ad break this week. This is just a quick break, as long as we're talking about quarantine stuff, COVID stuff. Just a reminder to, take care of yourself and take care of others. Reach out to friends, family if you can. Video chat's really good. Face-to-face stuff, not literally, but over video chat's really important too.
Stick your face in their face.
No,
Don't do that.
No. But it's important to right now in the midst of all this. It's overwhelming. It's scary for everyone, and to just remember to take some time for yourself to take care of yourself. And if you want, you can reach out to NAMI, NAMI, the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization. I have some contact info here. I'll put all this in the description, and I have a little graphic on the screen too. So if you want, you can get support for yourself or for others by going to NAMI.org, NAMI.org, or calling 1-800-950 NAMI, and that's 6264. So again, that's 1-800-950-6264 for some mental health support. It's like, it can be hard to admit maybe that's what you need right now, but we're giving you the push maybe you need or maybe you want right now to go take care of yourself. You're worth it. You deserve it.
Yeah. It can be an isolating time right now.
It's very isolating right now.
So feel free to admit that.
Yes. Yeah. We love you. You're good people, and
you are.
We care so much about you. Want you all to be safe. Okay, back to the show. Okay, so there's the initial kind of panic phase. We're all going to our signature locations in the film. What do you think? What's kind of next in our narrative?
I think it's the paranoia that sets in. Like once we all are locked inside the grocery store or the spaceship or, the hotel, what have you, is just sort of, you're not just dealing with the external threat, it's the internal one.
Yeah.
So whether it's your own psychosis or putting up with each other, it's all that sort of debate and how we slowly start to turn on each other.
Yeah. And I'm not familiar enough with the hierarchy of needs to be able to directly compare it. But
Maslow's hierarchy?
Is that? Yeah. See, I don't know, but it feels kind of related to that because it sounds like once you're safe and that okay, I'm not actively nailing up boards against the windows. Like now it's time to get a little bit more cerebral with it and think about, what's the root cause of this danger that's being presented to you.
Yeah, and humans are just so social that when we restructure the way we live and the way our society's set up, it's like, okay, well, now we have to figure out the new rules of this weird little society we've made in this grocery store because we're humans and that's what we do. Like, we have to build a hierarchy of like who's in charge. And that's when you start getting all the weirdo stock characters of all these disaster movies. Like, you get crazy religious lady and like,
it's the end of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where you start going a little Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
And I think that's also where you also start to realize, I think, in one of these really good stories, that the threat isn't so much the one you identified initially. It isn't the external threat. It's not really the shark you have to worry about. It's the fucking mayor.
Yeah.
You know, it's the government making the wrong decision, or it's the loudmouth religious nut locked inside the store with you, that they are either as equal to the threat out there or even more dangerous.
Right.
Yeah. And you know what? As we're discussing them, I'm starting to realize that this is one of my favorite subgenres of horror movies.
Yeah, I love it too.
Based on both, I mean, I love all those locations we discussed, like especially the mall and Dawn of the Dead. They're all such fun places to spend a movie's runtime in. And then I really like it when there are clashes of ideology and there are different people vying for leadership of a group based on their different beliefs. Like, I mean, The Mist, we're going to keep coming back to because
that's such a good example of it, though.
But with that, you got not only like the religious aspect that comes in a little bit later, but even earlier on, and which was included in your video, Andre Braugher's character of disbelief and the skepticism towards like something can't be this big to upheave our entire society. It just can't be this way. So I'm going to ignore it and hope for the best.
No.
No, what do you mean, no?
No, we got real problems to deal with here, and this pathetic attempt at a joke has gone far enough.
Yeah, again, it's the most dangerous thing is really the human ego, you know, more than anything. And I think it even applies to Alien, you know, in the form of Ash, who's really just a puppet of the company, you know. So it's, you know, people love to point the finger at the xenomorph as being the villain of the Alien series, and it's really not. It's the company.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the xenomorph is just a force of nature in the same way that the shark is a force of nature. And so it's like the real villain of Jaws is Mayor Vaughn and his refusal to close down the beaches and protect the people because he's so greedy. You know, which again, it mirrors exactly where we are right now.
It's a damn company. What about our lives, you son of a bitch?
I repeat, all other priorities are ascended.
I guess, yeah, because in a lot of these cases of these movies that we're talking about, that external threat that they're all trying to survive from doesn't really have motivation or even culpability, really. It's usually a more mindless thing, whether it's a zombie, which is undead, and, or an animal, like in The Mist, they're creatures, or the xenomorph, or like a virus, which it always blows my mind when I really think about how like a virus and a bacterial infection are different, because the bacteria is living and a virus isn't living. It's just this weird like glitch in coding that'll get in you and fuck you up. And it's
pretty close, but it's technically not alive.
It's technically not alive, and that's so weird to me.
Yeah.
And it makes it scarier.
Yeah, it is weird how the variables we can control, you know, like ourselves working with other people is like then the hardest thing to deal with. Yeah.
But I think you're right. Like that is a common theme. I mean, if you go back and look at the list of movies, you know, even 28 Days Later, the real villains of that piece are the military guys who think that they're going to repopulate the planet, you know, by sexually assaulting these women that have come to them for shelter.
We all heard stuff. Yeah. Like how they thought that there were other dimensions, you know, other worlds all around us, and how they wanted to try and make a window.
Oh, well, no, you mentioned The Mist because it's humans that opened the portal to that dimension.
Yeah.
Right? You know, it was a military experiment.
Yes, that's right.
You never see it, but they talk about it.
Yeah.
It's a very talky movie.
Yes.
It's a military experiment gone wrong. So it's like a lot of what these movies have in common is that humans did this to themselves.
Yeah.
And then threw gasoline on the fire.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just made it
sometimes worse. Literally.
Yeah. Which I think, you know, it kind of explains our current predicament. You know, I mean, like, you know, the debate about the origin of it is interesting.
Yeah.
And either one points to human culpability.
That's right. Yeah.
whether you want to believe that, COVID-19 is the result of some weird military program in China, or whether you want to believe it's the result of a wet market, humans still did this to ourselves.
Yeah, like at the 5G conspiracy theories that it's like the 5G phone networks are
that's been looped in by now?
Hell yeah, it has.
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah, I think that's another thing about these movies that appeal to me is just how tragic they are, because there are so many beats throughout the movies where people could have made decisions that would have been better and saved more people, but they fuck up because people fuck up, and then that costs lives. Like in Dawn of the Dead, when the bikers ruin it for them by dismantling their protective barriers and come in and just like are this agent of chaos. And like you keep relating it back to where we are now in the real world. I mean, they just had that report of what if we had started social distancing a week or two earlier, however many thousands of lives would have been saved.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I felt oddly prepared for this.
Yeah.
Again, like I'm not saying it was a conscious choice, but I think it was all subconscious programming from watching these movies for decades, where I was sort of oddly unfazed, and I kept joking that like my Sarah Connor survival genes were suddenly activated, and it was just sort of like, okay, what would McReady do? Like, it's like, and I credit these movies to a certain degree for sort of just almost providing an emotional crutch. It's like having loved these films for as long as we all have, the current events oddly sort of don't seem as horrifying, I think, if you were strictly a romantic comedy fan.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. And I also think too that in a way these movies prepare you for not just the crazy parts of this whole thing or the extremely disastrous parts of this whole thing, but like how boring this all is at a point. Like being holed up somewhere sucks, and I think that's a huge part of the reason that people we're dying to have stuff reopened, and it's human to want to go outside and see people, but it's like, having to resist that is like something that I think these movies will touch upon, but obviously it doesn't make for super exciting cinema. But you think like there's montages of like, we see people just sitting around in that grocery store or in Dawn of the Dead where they go, all right, I guess I'll go ice skating in the ice rink that's in this
the
mall.
fun and games.
Right.
Which that looks fun, actually, not super boring, but or like in The Thing, their source of entertainment is like that computer game.
Yeah, or they're watching the same VHS tapes over and over.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just how mind-numbing that all the stuff that gets left on the cutting room floor but is implied, that process of it is just it's exhausting.
But I think the movies also all point the finger to what we were just talking about, and we can maybe expand on is just the finger pointing and the threat of people turning on each other.
Yeah.
Which is, again, it tends to be scarier than sort of the threat of the otherworldly thing. You're actually more at risk from your fellow human beings.
I have definitely had interactions where it's just reminded me of stuff like The Thing, where you can't trust the person you're talking to. And in that movie, it's because they might be a shapeshifter. But in real life right now, it's because they might be an asymptomatic carrier of COVID.
Not wearing a mask and just like, And
so it's just, you walk by someone and you're like, is this person, my fellow human being, who I should have some kind of bond with just on the basis of our shared DNA, is this person going to kill me? Like inadvertently or not,
Yeah.
It's scary.
So, and there's a lot of scary videos floating around too of people who are, attempting to go into stores without masks because they say it's their constitutional right to walk into a grocery store not wearing a mask, blah, 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 even though the Constitution does allow for quarantine during a pandemic, but let's all forget that. There's now a whole subset of people who thumb their nose up at, these safety precautions, which is oddly sort of something that a lot of movies, I think, didn't predict. You never saw a zombie movie, that featured someone who's like, I'm going out there, I don't care what you say. I guess The Mist kind of did.
Yeah, The Mist
has some
a
of
little
that,
bit.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's so. I remember thinking that too. Is like we didn't predict. Yeah, people being like, it's my right to be a zombie. I'm gonna go shopping. Like it's wild. And I think a big part of it is just because the exterior threat in our case, in reality, is an uncontrolled, like it's a virus, like we said, it's not even alive, it has no conscience, it just is. And what's humans are, we just desire control. Like that's what humans do. We control our environments, we control each other. Like we're just such animals of control. And I feel like it's just people handling in different ways the desire to have some control over something. And in this case, I can control my decision to like make a political statement going into a store without a, it's in a weird way. I think that's a big part of it. It's just the desire
I will guarantee you that a lot of these people who are going out without wearing masks or thumbing their nose up at, safety precautions like that, I guarantee you they're not horror fans. I guarantee you that they haven't watched any of these movies.
They don't realize what character they are in the whole movie.
Exactly.
I will say, I read all my comments on my videos, and there have been very, very few that have been like COVID skeptics. Only like,
right.
Well,
on one hand, I could count the number of people who have commented on like, oh, it's not a big deal.
Well, there have been polls too that the majority of people think we're opening up too early. I think the majority of people are like, no, we should be. It's
a vocal minority.
It's just the vocal minority is more interesting to do a news story on, but
it's also, if we're gonna get into this discussion, there's also just this tendency for people to view things black and white,
sure,
and think that things either have to be like stayed locked down till vaccine or open everything up right now, which are obviously that's a false dichotomy. And it just sucks that I wish people would just pay more attention to science and be understanding that with science, as you learn things, you adjust your priors and change your tactics.
But that's also, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, that's the other key thing in a lot of these movies is the scientists tend to be ignored.
That's literally what I was just going to say.
Okay, good. Yeah, so whether, it's Dreyfus in Jaws, Wilford Brimley in The Thing, it's the scientists tend to be the ones that the pig-headed administrative official scoff at, ignore, because they know better. So again, it's like, I think that if you're a genre fan, I'd like to think that you're also smart enough to realize what characters you should or shouldn't listen to in life and which characters you should or shouldn't emulate in life. Like, don't be Mayor Vaughn in Jaws. Don't be that guy, like the roadmap is laid out before you if you choose to embrace that archetype.
Yeah. And like maybe Richard Dreyfuss is a little condescending sometimes and you're like, oh, this guy knows he's smarter than me and drives me nuts, but he's smarter than me and I should listen to him.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that Alien did do really well is they took the person that you do normally turn to, the science officer, and made them the villain.
Yeah.
So that was an excellent twist on their part. But
and that's terrifying
it's like,
too.
But like, don't be Burke in Aliens.
No,
don't be that corporate greedy fuck.
Mm-hmm.
Or the military guy in Day of the Dead. That's a big it's been a while since I've seen it.
That guy's so scary.
Yeah, and that's a big conflict in that movie, right? It's the scientists versus
science
the
versus
military.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm running this monkey farm now, Frankenstein, and I want to know what the fuck you're doing with my time.
Coming out of just panic, we're finding our allegiances. Because this would be like middle of the movie, heading towards like end of the second act, which usually like kind of a end of second act break of these types of movies.
Is probably putting together a
plan,
sorts,
yeah,
right?
like we're getting out of here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the human drama comes to a head. So you have the splinter of the factions, you have the people turning on each other, the ones who choose to go outside, which we did hit on.
Mm-hmm.
It's the people who decide they're going back in the water. Another beat that Evan and I threw in that I thought was kind of fun, and They Live really provided the fodder for that, was the role of the media in this, which is a little new, but then you also realize like movies have hit on that. It's like when you do see Mayor Vaughn being interviewed by the news media and the way he uses the spotlight to sort of get his message of it's safe, you can go back in the water, it's cool. Again, They Live, and sort of the mixed message that you get from the media and the propaganda from the aliens. And I think that's especially relevant now because you have, the 24-hour news cycle, which is the bane of human existence as far as I'm concerned. And then social media, which is just a disaster, a complete cesspool.
Yeah.
And so it's like there's no clear message. But it's like if you really think about it, what they tend to do is just get you addicted to fear.
Yes.
It's literally designed to do that in the same way that fast food and junk food is designed to get you addicted to fat, sugar, and salt, which are like 3 basic necessary ingredients to your survival. So they just pump all this crappy food full of those ingredients. The news does the exact same thing with fear and anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah, which are meant to be survival tools.
Right.
You just get overloaded with them.
Right. You pump a population full of that stuff mentally, and then they're just addicted to it.
Yeah. It's crazy to remember that news stations would just go off the air back in the day.
Yeah.
Poltergeist.
Go to bed. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, like, when I was growing up, you had the news, like my parents would watch the nightly news. There was like local news from 5:30 to 6, and then national news from like 6 to 6:30. And that was it. They didn't even really bother with like the late night news, and then there was like the morning paper. And I made a conscious decision to actually like cut the cable cord 10 years ago, because I realized, what's the point of having this, overly tanned makeup talking head in a box in my living room spouting constant negativity, which I might not be actively listening to, but just hearing news stories about fires, deaths, school shootings, et cetera. It's like, what's the point?
Yeah.
Like, engaging in the news should be something that's active and limited, not something passive and constant.
Yeah. I think that kind of constant news cycle too is what maybe makes people think that they're all experts, because it's like if I'm watching the news all day, I know I just know all the news. Like I'm constantly watching the news, and
which can be a problem when the news is so just modalized, I guess. I don't know if that's a word, but it's so specific. You can find your own news that just confirms your own beliefs.
Yeah. It's just a lot of confirmation bias, a lot of echo chamber, and just 100% toxic. Generally. And that was honestly like, Carpenter is just one of those filmmakers who's so ahead of his time.
Yes.
But like, that's why we chose to use They Live sort of sprinkled throughout it, because, he made that movie in the late 80s, when cable news was really sort of finding its feet. And we were all becoming addicted to cable television, and mass media was really starting to become a thing. And no pun intended, but it's like, I think he identified a threat, to sort of to our own just mental health.
Yeah. And he's very openly, talked to about just that era, and like the Reagan era specifically, and how, the 80s is just such a shift to like a super consumer base. Like the United States has always been like a consumer based culture, but the 80s is like that just jacked up to 11. As I'm wearing a Spinal Tap shirt. That's so lame. But it's, and he said in interviews about his work that it's like, that's, something he's been really aware of, and that he is critiquing.
He's the best.
Like They Live.
He's the best.
Adore
it.
Like
he's just he was so underappreciated for a long time. I think everyone's come back around to him. And really, and it's definitely been he's definitely been put up on the pedestal that he belongs on.
Yeah, I mean, earlier today I was just spending my time going through Christine, because I'm covering that, and it's just like, it's a movie that kind of gets overlooked, but it's just another amazing movie from him. Like, it's so good.
But again, what I love about it is that a lot of his movies from They Live, The Thing, onward, they have a very sort of subversive streak to them.
Definitely.
They're always entertaining. But, They Live being the best example of that. It's like they always have a very harsh critique with the direction our culture's heading in.
Oh, yeah. And they're a critique from the point of view of the masses, of the I consider him a very working class director. Lots of blue collar, the proletariat for sure. And same with Romero. I feel like the hallmark of a lot of really good horror directors is they do have this kind of proletariat, like, POV, which in a case of something like this during a pandemic, it's like where we're gonna find our strength is all working together as like people, and recognizing that the people who are really pushing to endanger us by maybe opening stuff up early or not encouraging proper research are people who stand to make money from this. They're people who are in charge.
It's crew expendable. That's what it is.
Exactly. It really is. That's all. It's crew expendable, and it's I think it's amazing to look at these movies that are from the POV of the the people and realize that's like we gotta look out for each other, man. Yeah. Oh man, horror's so cool.
It's the best. It's the best.
I'm just having such a moment like, oh, I love horror.
In fact, they're mythic. They channel our nightmares, all our fears, all our anxieties, but also all of our, theoretically, hopefully, just all the types of archetypes, all the kinds of personalities that can rise to the occasion to overcome.
Yeah, for sure. That's another, like we focus on a lot of the negative characters and tropes in these movies, but there are the types of people that are worth listening to and that, like you said, will rise to the occasion. I think that's another important thing to dissect.
By the way, that's a good thing to even touch on, is just who are the McCreadys, the Chief Brodys, the Ripleys, all these sort of heroes that do end up at least surviving, if not completely triumphing by the end. And what are the traits that they embody? And how do you identify those traits in yourself to really sort of get through the day? Because by the way, like I think about that, on the really rough days, and I've had a few rough days in quarantine. It's like, okay, like what would Sarah Connor do? All right, I'm gonna do some pull-ups. I'm gonna do some pull-ups for like the next hour at least. You know?
And I think of people who have been like whistleblowers. That's a very dangerous thing to be nowadays. But I think of again, like the Alien series, whistleblowers in that series are like the heroes. They're the ones who are pointing out like, hey, the company is like trying to fuck us. They don't care about us.
I think what's really sad though is that, I mean, obviously it's easier in a movie where it's a constructed world and, you write the terms and the characters, but, there's usually a good person, unambiguously good person, a leader to look up to in those movies. Mm-hmm. And I think it kind of sucks that you can't really point to anyone in real life, and if you can, it'll get some blowback just because everything's people are so divided and partisan now. Because you would think that Fauci would be a go-to guy of like, oh yeah, he's our good guy, and yet there is a small but vocal subdivision of people who are against him.
Or like
but
nurses.
I think well, I mean, I do think, I mean, fingers crossed, I'd like to think that the majority of the population is in support of our doctors and nurses and medical technicians. But, Fauci's interesting because it's like, we mentioned that he's sort of the equivalent of Richard Dreyfuss in Jaws, and there's that great moment in Jaws when Richard Dreyfuss first shows up at the island and he sees a bunch of fishermen piling into a boat. Yeah. And he tries to warn them, like, you can't go out that way. Your boat's going to sink. And they basically tell him to fuck off, and he turns around and he just mutters to himself, they're all going to die. Yeah. And it's like, I'd like to think Fauci's doing the same thing.
Yes, I
think actually what you just said, though, is a good thing to remember, because I just had like a little moment to myself sitting here of like, oh, we don't have a McCready. But I think, it's good to maybe think of, instead of national figures whose names we know, just think of, the doctors and nurses. And
it's not anybody who's going to be craving the spotlight.
Yes.
It's not. It's not going to be a celebrity. It's never going to be somebody sitting behind a news desk or a podium. Like, I think that's the other through line a lot of these movies have, is that it's the everyman. It's the town sheriff. It's the, everyone talks about how the crew of Alien, like a bunch of space truckers.
Yeah.
And it's the next door neighbor.
Yeah. And then, in a movie, we got to have our character to identify with. We have a name and a face. But in real life, it's, maybe expanding that to be a bit of a metaphor and thinking, right, like of groups of people, like people who work in grocery stores, I'm like in awe of and should be making six figures.
But by the way, guess who one of the main heroes of The Mist is? It's the grocery store clerk.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Honestly, he's amazing. Yeah, he's amazing. And like that's what I love about these movies is that it's the unlikely heroes rising to the occasion.
Yeah, reluctant leaders, which is the best kind of leader in a crisis. It's the
Rowdy Roddy Piper was just a drifter. Jamie Lee Curtis is Jamie Lee Curtis is just a babysitter, and McReady he's kind of an anti-hero. He's like a hard drinking helicopter pilot who clearly has a lot of trust issues.
Yeah, he doesn't even want it.
They're not even. It's like these aren't people who are automatically good when you first meet them. They're a little rough around the edges a lot of times. I feel like what we're doing is we're creating that sort of the opening part of the video game where you have to choose your fighter.
Yeah.
And that's how I think everyone has to look at this pandemic. It's just okay. In sort of the vast menu of all these sort of horror movie heroes, choose your fighter. Choose the one that you identify with, who matches your own values, direction you'd want to head in. And just do your best to emulate what that character would do and avoid becoming all the villains of the pieces.
Yeah.
I think that's the best advice we can hope for right now.
For sure.
As we live in this timeless period.
Better that, don't be Agent Smith. Don't be Karen. There's a lot of Karens right now. We don't need any more of those.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're an essential worker right now, you're the fucking best, and you deserve so much more than what you're being given.
Yeah.
Just in general.
Before we let you go, I did want to ask you, because, you've made, some big fucking movies, dude. Are you comfortable calling yourself like a horror filmmaker, or would you prefer just filmmaker? Because I know that some people kind of, they bristle at it.
I don't bristle at it, but I feel like I'm just getting started, to be honest.
Yeah.
I'm a filmmaker, and who happens to love horror and monsters, and all my movies have had monsters of one variety or another.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll make a straight drama or thriller someday. I don't know. But I just love monsters so much.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate it.
I would love to have you back sometime to just do an episode about kaiju and stuff. I feel like that would be dope.
We could do a Halloween episode.
Yes.
Yeah, it can all be about hashtag Halloween at home come October.
Oh God.
Oh man.
Oh, that hurts to hear.
It does hurt.
I know it does, but I'm already one of my favorite traditions is helping my nephew plan for Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
And because he's gonna be 10 soon, and he's getting into doing his own home haunt.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're gonna have a whole push on social media of how do you make Halloween awesome for kids in your backyard, your front yard, inside the house. How do you trick or treat inside the house, whether it's a scavenger hunt? What do the movies need to because I just can't imagine that by October we're going to be having Halloween parties.
No, I don't think so.
And haunted houses. So it's I'm all for decorating tips and recipes. Yeah, and weddings.
Yeah.
We can definitely.
That'd be so fun. We can do a whole. It'll be like our version of Martha Stewart's Halloween. We'll do how to have Halloween at home and fun things.
The lighting, the recipes, the movie marathons, all that stuff.
Oh, that's such a good idea.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's good.
I love it.
Man, I can't imagine. I feel so bad for kids right now because you only get so many years as a kid, and when you're in your adult years, 1 year, whatever, it's the same more or less than the years around it. But when you're a kid, man, each year is something special, and to have one be.
I still plan on decorating my front yard. I'd like to think that maybe you can at least still roam around and look at decorations. I just don't know if handing out treats is going to be a safe thing.
Yeah.
You'll be wearing a mask.
That's true. Yeah. Oh man. Well, we'll see when we get there.
Yeah.
Yep.
So.
Boy. Well, cool. Thank you so much, Mike. This was so fun. And we'll have you back on. And
yeah, just stay safe and healthy.
Yeah, stay safe.
You too. All right.
All right. Cool.
Until next time, I'm James.
And I'm Chelsea.
And this was Mike Dougherty. And this has been the Dead Meat Podcast.